In the past, I've ranted about big trucks and America's poor transportation infrastructure. My dismay reached a breaking point a few weeks ago though, when I was leaving the grocery store and walking back to my car. Parked a spot away from me was an average-sized Chevy Silverado. As I walked in front of it, I noticed where the hood reached my body. Now I'm 5'9", so I'm no little person. But the hood of this truck hit me squarely in my shoulders. I'm not stupid. I've noticed how big modern trucks have become. It's something that I notice often because it pisses me off. Yes, I'm something of a triggered liberal myself. Shockingly enough, the actions of people have consequences that affect other people than just themselves. And when I realize this, it kind of frustrates me. If this truck hit me going anything over 40 miles per hour, there's a 50% chance that I would die on impact. If it was going 60 miles per hour, I would likely be dead. Those statistics I just read, however, did not consider both the height and weight of a vehicle as a variable. Of course, no matter what size a vehicle is, if you're getting hit by a vehicle going over 60 miles per hour, you're probably going to die. However, when I was standing in front of this truck, I really considered what it would be like to be hit by it. What can I say? I have OCD. Getting hit by this truck at my height would be like throwing my entire body into a brick wall. It isn't just trucks, it's any vehicle with a higher front end. In a research paper published to Science Direct in 2024, Justin Tyndall examined U.S. crash data with physical estimates of a vehicle's height to estimate the probability of pedestrian death based on the height of a vehicle. Tyndall estimates that a 10-centimeter increase in the vehicle's front end height is associated with a 22% increase in fatality risk. While in this video, I'll be focusing on standard off-the-lot trucks. Trucks that are lifted and barely even street legal also pose significant risk. Add on to that, trucks with dual back wheels that have huge widths, and the safety of not only pedestrians, but also other drivers further decreases. A nonprofit, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, reported in 2024 that, in general, higher vehicle front ends increase the likelihood of both moderate and serious pedestrian injuries. At 27 miles per hour, the average speed of all 202 crashes, a median height car had a 60% chance of causing moderate injuries to a pedestrian, and a 30% chance of causing serious injuries. In comparison, a median height pickup with a front end 13 inches higher than that of a median car had an 83% chance of causing moderate injuries and a 62% chance of causing serious injuries. The height of these trucks is dangerous not only because of their place of impact on the human body, but also because of the reduced vision that the driver has due to their height. A 2023 study from the IIHS found that SUVs, pickup trucks, and yes, even vans are all more likely to hit pedestrians while turning. At intersections, the odds that a crash that killed a crossing pedestrian involved a left turn by the vehicle versus no turn were about twice as high for SUVs, nearly 3 times as high for vans and minivans, and nearly 4 times as high for pickups as they were for cars. The odds that a crash that killed a crossing pedestrian involved a right turn by the vehicle were also 89% higher for pickups and 63% higher for SUVs than for cars. While the height and length of the hood is an obvious factor for a truck or SUV's reduced vision, minivans specifically have a sloped hood with more visibility, or so you'd think. The danger in their design and the other vehicles could be the positioning of their A-pillars, the sides of the windshield that hold up the roof. These need to be stronger for bigger vehicles since they weigh more, so they're positioned differently than they would be on a small car. Furthermore, the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards do not require auto manufacturers to test the safety of their vehicles in regards to anyone outside of the vehicle, cyclists or pedestrians. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration also does not consider anyone else except for those inside the vehicle being tested on when determining crash safety ratings. The H and NHTSA underscores the federal focus on motor vehicle occupants. Unlike streets, highways are virtually devoid of anyone else but drivers and their passengers. To this day, the encyclopedic federal safety standards contain rules on everything from windshield wipers to brake pads, but nothing related to risk borne by those outside the car. As for the weight of the car, that actually matters less than you may think within pedestrian crashes. Tyndall wrote, "The ratio of a vehicle's weight to a person's weight is large. Therefore, a marginal increase in a vehicle's weight might only have a small effect on the amount of kinetic energy transferred from the vehicle to a person's body. However, the dimensions of the vehicle's front end could have dramatic effects on the physics of the collision from the pedestrian's perspective." The IIHS in their report also provided this caveat. Vehicle weight doesn't play a major role in pedestrian crashes since any vehicle, even a small car, vastly outweighs a person. Vehicle fatalities can obviously stem from many other factors. Speeding, for one, causes about a third of traffic-related deaths in the US. Driving under influence and distracted driving are also huge reasons for the United States' high traffic-related fatalities. I wouldn't argue for banning tractor trailers because they can be dangerous due to their size. However, the size of single-person vehicles has only continued to increase, and so has the amount of them on the road, possibly leading to worse outcomes in traffic crashes. Light trucks, a vehicle classification that refers to vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating, GVRW, of up to 8,500 pounds and a payload capacity of up to 4,000 pounds, accounted for 80% of all new vehicles sold in the US in 2023. This includes actual trucks and SUVs. The amount of traffic-related fatalities has, however, been projected to decrease in 2024. So it'd be dishonest for me to try and link the increase to bigger vehicles to more traffic-related fatalities. Prior to that statistic though, traffic-related deaths had been continuously rising, notably after light trucks first outsold cars in 2002. At the end of the day, we can't ignore the increased risk that these bigger vehicles pose. Not only that, but the increase of bigger vehicles in our already car-dominated society is creating various other new problems that we have yet to contend with. Today, I'll be personally airing out my issues with America's car economy, as well as the dangers that our dependence on cars, lack of public transportation, and poor infrastructure has had and will continue to have on all of us. I hope to add a new perspective to this argument using my rural and leftist political backgrounds, and to maybe, possibly, finally bridge the gap between those who are pro and anti-car. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go park this truck so that I can go record the rest of this video. That could just, America's car dependence is a twofold problem. Part of it is the size of our vehicles, our rampant individualism, and our genuine love for single-person vehicles. Some people even have sex with cars. These issues stem from our culture and our individual choices, yet they also permeate our government. The first problem is our culture, which results in the aforementioned issues, but also the second problem: poor infrastructure, a dependence on cars, and a lack of public transportation. Compared to the top-selling vehicles in countries like Japan or Germany, it's clear that Americans value oversized vehicles. Up until very recently, the Ford F-150 was the best-selling vehicle in the United States for 47 years. It was replaced just this past year with the Toyota RAV4, an SUV, so it's not that surprising. Now, compare our top-selling vehicles to Japan's top-selling car for the past 3 years, the Honda N-Box. No one in this country would be caught dead driving that thing unless they actually wanted to be caught dead. American vehicles, specifically trucks, have only gotten bigger, more expensive, and less useful throughout the years. Although my eyes are good enough at discerning the size of these trucks, a useful website to use for comparison is carsize.com, where you can swap out different makes and models to see the actual size difference between them. For example, here is a difference between my car, a Volkswagen EOS, and a 4-door Ford F-150. My car isn't the smallest car in the world by any means either. It only has 2 doors, but is very wide in the back due to it being a sports model. Yet in every angle, it is still dwarfed by most modern trucks. Even more disturbing is the comparison of my car with a supersized SUV like the Cadillac Escalade. Now, while I personally find this size comparison damning enough, I understand that some people may not see an immediate issue with a vehicle the size of a Ford F-150 or a Cadillac Escalade. I am well aware that plenty of people use trucks purely for utility's sake. Of course, there are people who genuinely require a vehicle with a high torque and towing capacity. Maybe they frequently tow a camper, cattle, or heavy machinery. There's no doubt that if you're looking to get a truck for one of these reasons, some of the newer Ford F-150 engines vastly outperform their older models. However, even modern engines like the 2025 2.7-liter EcoBoost V6 have very similar torque and towing capacities to older models like the 2003 Ford F-150, yet the modern truck is still bigger in both height and length. I also find that certain comparisons between truck sizes of old and new can lack information and ignore the main problem with modern trucks. For example, you may have seen multiple images comparing the bed size of old and modern Ford trucks. Take this image from Axios. On the farthest left is a Ford F-150 from the 70s, and on the farthest right is a modern Ford F-150. The point of this image is to draw attention to how modern trucks with crew cabs, aka 4 doors, have less bed space, essentially shrinking the use case for these huge vehicles. However, it would have been more accurate to compare single cabs in this picture, since even modern Ford F-150s with single cabs have about a 50% bed length versus a 70s Ford F-150, which had a 64% bed length. In reality, most modern single cab trucks have the same bed length as older trucks. Take this Chevy CK, which was produced in the early 90s, compared to a modern Ford F-150 or even a Ford F-350. The beds are the same length, but the increased height and length make these trucks dramatically bigger. I mean, of the huge portion of Americans who bought a brand new Ford F-150 last year, Do you really think that every single one of them needed that truck for its increased towing capacity? These image comparisons also ignore how safety and gas economy standards have changed over the years, which caused manufacturers to alter their build of their vehicles, for better or worse. A more honest comparison would have better supported their main point, that trucks have gotten dramatically bigger and have strayed farther from their use capabilities. In fact, survey data from research vehicle firm Strategic Vision shows a third of today's pickup owners rarely or never use their truck for hauling, while 2/3 rarely or never use it for towing. The Drive put it better than I could. Truck owners might protest that they are slightly less likely than owners of other categories to use their vehicle as primary transport, 83% versus 95%. And they might also protest that trucks provide capabilities that other vehicles lack. But as it turns out, a significant portion of truck owners never use their trucks for these capabilities. According to Edwards' data, 75% of truck owners use their truck for towing one time a year or less. Nearly 70% of truck owners go off-road one time a year or less. And a full 35% of truck owners use their truck for hauling, putting something in the bed, once a year or less. While there are some people who do need trucks for this purpose, and I don't think that their ability to own and use a truck for their lives should be hindered, most truck owners are not in this marginal group of people. If you need a truck only once a year, wouldn't it make more sense to rent one? But no. We're Americans. We can't do that. We need to own everything ourselves, even if it costs us and others. Automakers promoted light trucks as safer, more practical, and desirable vehicles for everyday use, shifting their image from niche work vehicles to mainstream family and personal cars. The sedans and station wagons that once formed the backbone of many American households' car choices in the 1980s were gradually pushed out. The main issue is that for the sake of freedom, Americans have transitioned to driving huge trucks and SUVs as status symbols. The same Axios article reported that. Experts say much of the big pickup mania is being driven by consumers' self-image. Today, personality and imagery are playing an even more important role in how consumers choose which truck is right for them. Strategic Vision researcher Alexander Edwards told Axios, the firm surveys owners each year about the character traits they associate with their vehicle. Two words set F-150 owners apart: powerful and rugged. Alexander Edwards, president of automotive research and consulting firm Strategic Vision, told The Drive. When asked for attributes that are important to them, truck owners oversample in ones like the ability to outperform others, to look good while driving, to present a tough image, to have their car act as an extension of their personality, and to stand out in a crowd. Trucks and SUVs are dangerous to pedestrians and cyclists, and not even useful to the drivers. What else? One of the obvious downsides to using these vehicles for casual single-person transportation is their gas efficiency, or lack thereof. The Bureau of Transportation Statistics have reported that since the year 2000, light-duty vehicles with a long wheelbase, most modern trucks like the Ford F-150 and large SUVs like the Chevrolet Suburban, average about a quarter less miles per gallon than light-duty vehicles with a short wheelbase. Even worse, while light-duty vehicles with short wheelbases have gradually, albeit not greatly, improved in fuel standards, long wheelbase vehicles have stagnated. Bigger vehicles will always use more fuel. That's a given. But car manufacturers don't seem to really care about making their trucks or giant SUVs more gas efficient. Moreover, fuel efficiency in a tractor trailer, for example, is bad, but the use case for them is great. Regular people driving a gas guzzler as their daily vehicle, though, makes absolutely no sense. Again, a huge driving force in the issue of huge vehicles is a culture that normalizes this. A better option would be, for example, a diesel-powered truck, but people are unlikely to buy those due to the higher tax on diesel fuel. If gas prices are artificially lowered, then what's stopping the average car consumer from buying a roomier, safer vehicle with bad gas mileage over a smaller car? Working out the requirements of a 100 mile per gallon car makes it clear just how feasible it would be to build, say, a 75 mile per gallon car for far less money. Besides, saving money isn't the only reason people choose a car. It became fashionable to drive SUVs because they projected an image of power and an active lifestyle. It's possible to imagine drivers being drawn to the environmental and national security benefits of efficiency and to the cutting-edge engineering as well. So perhaps people have been asking the wrong question all along. It's not why can't they build a 100 mile per gallon car, but rather, do we really want one? Presently, the Trump administration will effectively no longer be enforcing certain fuel economy standards thanks to the gluttonous, hideous bill. Within the bill, it states that if a car maker does not meet the corporate average fuel economy CAFE standards, they will not be fined, rendering these standards useless. On top of this, any company that has violations within the past 3 years will see their fines waived. This comes after the EPA reported that in 2023, the United States fuel economy reached a record high, while CO2 emissions reached a record low. They wrote in their reporting, despite the significant improvements in local air pollution that have benefited Americans, passenger cars and light trucks still accounted for nearly 17% of total US GHG emissions in 2022, indicating the importance of further reductions on GHG emissions and improvements in fuel economy. While they may seem like a positive government regulation, These CAFE standards from the EPA are actually a part of the reason why trucks have gotten bigger. The YouTube channel All Cars with John made a video detailing this phenomenon. Basically, vehicles have a measured footprint determined by their wheelbase and wheel track size. In order to meet these fuel economy standards, vehicle manufacturers have found a loophole in this footprint. Essentially, bigger vehicles, like trucks, don't have to meet as strict fuel standards as smaller vehicles, meaning that while trying to force car manufacturers to meet decent fuel economy standards, the EPA has actually instead incentivized them to make bigger trucks with worse fuel standards. Bigger trucks also coincidentally have bigger profit margins than smaller, more efficient, and more useful trucks. The American auto industry lobbied for more lenient fuel economy standards for light trucks compared to passenger cars, arguing that these vehicles were primarily used for utilitarian purposes such as work and hauling. This led to separate classifications for the CAFE fuel standards, one for the smaller cars and another for those bigger, lighter trucks. Popular Mechanics reported in 2011, the pending changes to federal corporate average fuel economy CAFE regulations call for a stunning 5% increase in fuel economy per year, culminating in a fleet average of 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025. Common sense and a fair amount of industry experts would indicate that cars are about to get smaller, or at the very least stop getting bigger, and the SUVs will continue their steady decline in popularity. According to a new report from the University of Michigan College of Engineering, however, CAFE will likely have the opposite effect. It will lead to an increase in size for most vehicles, and more SUVs and light trucks on the road. Overall, the footprint of the entire US fleet could get between 2 to 32% bigger, resulting in a 1 to 4 miles per gallon drop in efficiency. The EPA's carbon emission regulations also conveniently don't apply to EVs, although they too create a footprint through not only their charging ports, but also through their raw material collection. Without any EV regulations, manufacturers can create gargantuan electric cars like the Hummer, which despite its 310-mile charge range, has a 1.5 mile per hour kilowatt efficiency, as calculated by Motor Trend. This means that it uses more energy to cover the same distance that a smaller car would, thus it needs to be charged more often. It's comparable to a gasoline car with a huge tank, but with poor miles per gallon. Purported smaller and more practical trucks like the Ford Ranger are now almost the exact same size as average trucks like the single cab F-150, only they have a smaller bed, making them even less useful than their counterparts. The way light trucks are classified has also allowed manufacturers to squeeze out as much profit as possible from these huge vehicles. This classification originates from the 1964 chicken tax, which imposed a 25% tariff on potato starch, dextrin, brandy, and light trucks imported from Europe as a retaliatory measure against European tariffs on American chicken imports. Today, only the light truck component of the chicken tax remains, upheld by continuing lobbying efforts from the auto industry to maintain the 25% protectionist tariff. While initially intended to target European manufacturers, the tariff is now primarily imposed on trucks imported from Asia. So we have two government policies and a toxic culture that makes bigger vehicles more desirable to auto manufacturers and consumers. How much worse can it get? There's another loophole in the form of a tax deduction. David Zipper wrote for Vox. In 1984, Congress stopped allowing small business owners to take a tax deduction for the purchase price of cars used for work, but the bill included a giant loophole. To protect those who need a heavy-duty vehicle, think farmers or construction workers, Congress made an exception, known as Section 179, for cars that weigh over 6,000 pounds when fully loaded with passengers and cargo. While a law like this can serve its intended purpose, helping construction teams and so on save money in their businesses, what it really does is further our dependency on huge vehicles, incentivizing businesses of any kind to buy them over smaller cars. I mean, this is off the script, but I'm just thinking right now about someone who's like an Uber driver, right? That's their own personal business. They're a contract worker. Why would they buy a smaller car if they can get a tax deduction on a huge car? We've already discussed the dangers that large SUVs and trucks pose to people on the street. But what about other drivers? Like I covered at the beginning of the video, crash safety ratings do not consider the safety of other drivers or passengers. They only consider those within the vehicle being tested. In 2022, Slate reported on a tweet made by the IIHS, an organization that I've cited multiple times throughout this video. The tweet included an image which read, "Smaller cars provide less crash protection." A convenient line of propaganda, and I'll explain why. Safety has been a huge part of Americans' desire for large vehicles. They are treated like tanks, with car buying decisions essentially becoming an arms race for drivers. Surveys show drivers believe larger vehicles are safer. This has a major influence on deciding which car to buy, among other factors such as prestige and off-road capabilities. The perception of safety could potentially lower a driver's sense of risk aversion, leading to riskier driver behaviors. Statistically speaking, a smaller car could offer less protection in a crash, but these stats are partly derived from a smaller car's crash impact with a much larger car. In truth, small cars are not that much unsafe on their own. The point I'm trying to make is that these cars do protect their drivers perfectly fine, except for when they're up against vehicles that are nearly twice their size and triple or quadruple their weight. Buying a bigger vehicle is sensible for those who require it, not only workers with trucks, but also families with many members and or children. But as I've drilled into your head enough times by now, most people are not buying these vehicles for their utility. Let's consider for a moment the four-wheel drive and all-wheel drive capabilities of some of these vehicles. They're useful if you live in an area that gets a lot of snow, but now we're even seeing an increase in front-wheel drive trucks, completely crippling one of the reasons people in the north would even need to drive one of these. Does someone in an urban environment of any kind, but especially in some place like Southern California, really need a tank truck? More than that, I've driven through 6 brutal Pennsylvania winters with my trusty Volkswagen EOS, and I have had no issues. But do you know who I see on the side of the road half the time during a snowstorm? People in SUVs and trucks. Due to their perceived safety, drivers in these larger cars may not drive as cautiously as drivers in other vehicles, including during snow or ice storms. People who have four-wheel drive trucks will drive like 60 miles per hour on the road, even when it's all ice. Having four-wheel drive will not save you against ice. It's obvious that pedestrians and cyclists pay a price when every car on the road is essentially a tank. But other drivers in smaller vehicles are also at risk. Compact and subcompact cars have the highest fatal collision rate by size, at 3.6 per billion miles. In comparison, large vehicles have a rate of only 2. Physics play a major role in crash survival. When two small cars collide, the forces tend to equalize, and both vehicles hold up relatively well. However, when a small car hits a full-size truck or SUV, the smaller vehicle absorbs most of the force. The IIHS performed a series of crash tests in 2019, where they paired a mid-sized SUV and a small Kia, as well as a large car and a mini car made by Toyota. Their results showed that both smaller vehicles, the 2018 Kia Forte and 2018 Toyota Yaris IA, had good ratings in the 5 IIHS tests relevant to driver protection, but they performed poorly in collisions with the larger vehicles. The increased risks to smaller vehicles stem from both the height and weight of the larger vehicle. However, very recently, auto manufacturers made changes to their energy-absorbing structures in their trucks and SUVs to better match the structure of smaller cars. It has seemingly worked. In 2017 to 2022, car occupants were at no greater risk of dying in collisions with SUVs than with cars, compared with a 28% greater risk in 2013 to 16 and a 59% greater risk in 2009 to 2012. Although car and SUV crash fatalities decreased, pickup trucks, while still decreasing, still increased the risk of fatality for the driver in smaller cars by nearly 2 times. The weight of these vehicles is also still a very present risk for those in smaller cars. A recent study even found that for every 500 pounds added to a vehicle over 4,000 pounds, it increases the risk of death for the occupants in smaller cars. For cars over 4,000 pounds, both drivers have an additional 2 deaths. For SUVs, there was no increased safety to those in the SUV, but there was an additional 2 deaths for the occupants of a car. For pickups, there was again no increased safety to the truck occupants, but there was an additional 7 deaths for the occupants of the car. These bigger vehicles can actually be more dangerous to their occupants than a small car due to their high rollover rate. EVs are not a special breed of vehicles either, as they can weigh more than the standard gas or diesel power car. The Hummer EV that I mentioned earlier, it weighs nearly 10,000 pounds. What are we doing? This is only more evidence of the fact that electric cars will not save us, as the problem is much deeper than each of our individual personal cars. Light trucks are in fact subject to different safety regulations than passenger cars. The Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards not only don't consider pedestrians when determining a vehicle's safety rating, but they also don't consider smaller cars in crash tests when determining safety ratings for light trucks. Light trucks are allowed to have stiffer frames and higher height due to their design, meaning they don't need to be crash compatible with cars with softer frames and lower heights. Motor Trend reported more than 40,000 people die on America's roads every year, making them nearly twice as dangerous per mile driven than those in other rich nations. Furthermore, there are 11.6 deaths per 1,000 people on the roads in the US versus 1.3 to 3.2 per 1,000 in European countries. SUVs and trucks should be subject to much stricter safety regulations, and these government policies promoting the production of bigger and less useful vehicles need to be altered and/or eliminated completely. More than that though, our culture needs to change in order to reduce the amount of people buying these vehicles for no reason other than to drive to work and back. But our obsession with these vehicles is bigger than just a type of car. It's an all-out dependence on single-person vehicles, largely through no fault of our own. When vehicles get bigger and bigger, they obviously take up more and more road space, creating more traffic and more congestion. In fact, another reason for me deciding to make this video was an on-the-road encounter I had with an oversized truck. I was driving home on a smaller back road, paved, but thinner than an average American road. Despite this, I usually have no problem passing trucks, cars, or SUVs on this road. On this day, however, it was different. I was behind a tractor on the road and he pulled over to let me pass. On the opposite side of the road, though, was a Ram truck with dual back wheels. The driver kept moving forward,
seemingly expecting me to pull over behind the tractor to let him by. The truck was so wide, he took up 3/4 of the road. I wasn't about to pull off on the side of the road. This road had a steep lip of pavement on both sides, and I didn't want to scrape the bottom of my car because of this gluttonous truck. I moved over as far as I could, and he passed me bitterly, having to drive slightly off the road to fit. Not like it hurt his truck or anything, it's literally a foot off the ground. I was annoyed, like I said. I am something of a triggered liberal myself, and I was irritated that this huge truck could just take up almost an entire road, putting other people on the road at risk. American roads are getting bigger to support not necessarily bigger vehicles, but more vehicles in general, all while discarding any alternate forms of travel that could take their place or coexist with them. Every year, states spend billions of dollars expanding highways, while other solutions to congestion, like public transit and pedestrian projects, are usually handled by city transit authorities and receive less funding. While adding lanes can ease congestion initially, it can also encourage people to drive more. A few years after a highway is widened, research shows traffic and the greenhouse gas emissions that come along with it often returns. Business Insider reports that the Katy Freeway in Houston, not named after the disgraced pop singer, was extended in 2008 at a cost of around $2.8 billion. But instead of helping with congestion, traffic actually increased substantially from 2011 to 2014 as more vehicles used the additional lanes. Some states, however, like Texas, require funding to be used on highways before any other forms of transport, meaning the problem of roads widening is unfortunately not easily solvable. In 2022, for instance, of the $1.3 trillion put aside federally for transport, only 20% was for transit, while 80% went to highways, as reported by Business Insider. Johns Hopkins University reported in 2023 that narrower road lanes with more room for bike lanes and sidewalks could lead to safer streets. In a Q&A with an assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering, Dr. Shima Hamidi, she says that streets in the US are designed to facilitate fast and convenient driving. The idea is that since drivers have more room to make mistakes, traffic accidents will be less likely. We wanted to test this idea. She said that this was the first national study on lane widths and safety. Summarizing the results, she said, "What we found was that when you compare 9, 10, and 11-foot lanes, there is no difference in the number of crashes. But when you compare 12-foot lanes with 9 and 10-foot lanes, you see that the wider lanes are actually more dangerous. The number of crashes on a street with 12-foot lanes is significantly higher than on streets with narrower lanes. The reason is that wider lanes don't give drivers more room for mistakes, they just make drivers drive faster." Despite this, half of American states have at least an 11-foot minimum lane width, and multiple governing agencies like the National Freight Network or the International Fire Code require minimum widths for freight routes or fire access roads, meaning implementing smaller lanes could prove to be more difficult than some may like. While in certain areas, narrower roads can be extremely beneficial, in other areas, they may be more troublesome than helpful. Plus, wider roads will still be necessary for larger transport vehicles, but they don't necessarily need to be the standard. Regardless, it will be impossible to create narrower lanes unless state, federal, and local policies change to allow the construction of them. Narrower roads won't save us though. Not when most American roads are poorly or barely maintained. The quality of our roads come back to our government, but also big vehicles. Indeed, the weight of a vehicle directly correlates to the damage that it does on a road. A 6,000-pound vehicle causes 5 times as much road damage as a standard 4,000-pound sedan. Road damage increases exponentially as vehicles become heavier, such that a GMC Hummer EV weighing 9,063 pounds will cause 116 times as much road damage as a Honda Civic weighing 2,762 pounds. On roads that are already in poor condition, especially in rural areas, heavier vehicles only exacerbate the issue. In Pennsylvania, where I live, the state government has essentially been smuggling our gas tax to the state police for years. While the tax was meant to improve the quality of our roads, well, if you just drive on one of them, I think you'll soon see that this is pretty far from the truth. I mean, I can't even remember the last time my road was actually paved and not tar and chipped. Congestion clearly gets worse with added lanes. Some cities around the world have tried to solve this with things like congestion pricing. New York City implemented its own congestion pricing in June 2024, charging a sliding scale fee for vehicles based on their sizes and rideshare status entering zoned areas of Manhattan during peak travel hours. The goal was to reduce traffic while using the funds to invest in the city's poor public transit. The Guardian reported that traffic speeds increased by 15%, that vehicle emissions decreased by 2.5%, and that noise complaints along Canal Street, a key artery in Lower Manhattan, have reduced by 70% since its implementation. However, Mark Watts, executive director of C40 Cities, a global network of mayors, told the BBC, "You've got to give people a genuine choice, not just make it expensive to drive, but an opportunity to switch to walking and public transport," he explains. Barcelona included free travel for 3 years for those who got rid of polluting cars. Stockholm expanded bus services. London around ULEZ has offered discounts on car clubs, bike hire, and scrappage. Clearly, we cannot rely on the government to save us. We need a cultural shift as much as we need serious policy change if we want to see our dependency on individual vehicles decrease. While scrolling through pro-car spaces online, I found a lot of very aggressive people who mostly use scapegoats and strawman arguments to own the libs who believe in better urban planning. Granted, a lot of anti-car people can be incredibly aggressive and ignorant as well, especially when talking about rural residents, but there is a power imbalance between the two. People who are anti-car are not represented in our governments, which consistently favor band-aids for our car size independence problem, or no aids at all. While the latter are actually the majority opinions you'll find among Americans, at least to a less radicalized extent, their ideas, like most popular ideas in America, are not overly represented in government. Scrolling through these anti-car communities, you'll see a lot of people who genuinely despise cyclists for some reason, and who frequently use drug addicts and homeless people as scapegoats for why they hate public transport. Moving to a less car-centered society would likely make people who want to own a car, especially a big car, for personal reasons, harder, but it doesn't equate to banning anyone from ever driving a car. Non-public transport cycling or walking options are obviously better in certain circumstances. You shouldn't be forced to ride a bike if it's pouring out. You shouldn't have to carry your grocery haul on a bus, and so on. I'm not making this video to argue that no one should ever drive a single-person vehicle ever again. I'm making it because America has a serious problem in our culture and infrastructure. While some people who are anti-car may have brain-rotted takes that demonize and infantilize rural people, there are plenty on this side of the debate who are sensible and trying to make a better world where we do not have to rely on single-person vehicles. Owning a car is incredibly expensive, and it's not right that we live in a country where you need a car in order to function. If you're poor, get fucked. Most of what we're discussing when we talk about creating walkable cities with road space for public transport like buses, trolleys, and trains are, well, cities. But rural residents also need more options, as solutions for cities will not easily translate to rural areas. Rural areas are obviously less populated and extremely spread out, much more than your average suburban sprawl, meaning having a car is essentially a requirement if you want to get to your dentist appointment or to the grocery store. The solution isn't a forceful transfer of rural residents into the city. We deserve quality roads and transportation options just like anyone else. Although basic transit services operate in and around populated town centers in some rural areas, buses generally come infrequently, making it challenging to rely on public transit. Cheaper transportation options and community-based car sharing and carpooling, however, could yield the biggest benefits for day-to-day mobility. Most rural areas, in fact, have denser downtowns that could be walkable and bikeable, but over time, as cars have increased in popularity, they've only become more sprawled out. Similar to how American suburbia was born out of both white American dream propaganda and a growing dependence on single-person vehicles. Even in my town, there is an obvious gap between the areas that were there before cars and after. Our downtown area is all walkable, with houses and businesses coinciding. But the strip mall down by our Walmart is about 2 miles down a road that is essentially impossible to travel on unless you have a car. Where I live, we do have some sort of public transport, but it's vans only for elderly or disabled people. We obviously have school buses that pick up kids who live outside of town. So why can't we have a system similar to that for non-students? Obviously, it's incredibly hard to implement a system to transport people from the middle of buttfuck into town, but say a bus came through on certain times down certain roads, like a school bus, and would drop people off at the town's main hub. Of course, then you have the issue of the large sprawl downtown that I mentioned. But again, that only exists because the strip mall downtown was designed for cars, not people. Bus options would not completely replace the need for cars, but they could lessen the dependency. More than that, I would love an option to take a bus or train from my town into the nearest urban area, but we, like most of the country, don't have that option. In Switzerland, for comparison, many residents have reported that most smaller communities have access to trains and buses, instead of the US's selective transportation model. Rural Health Information Hub reported on fixed bus transit systems in rural areas. Fixed route services may not always meet the needs of residents. They do not operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and residents who have mobility limitations or who do not live or work near bus stops may be unable to access bus routes. For this reason, transportation options in rural communities also include ride-sharing, volunteer models, mobility on demand, and mobility management models. Most of us in rural areas are not going to be physically able to bike 10, 15, 20 miles in a town. Electric bikes could be a good solution, but cost, time, and lack of bike lanes are still a problem. Most people are not going to choose other forms of transit if they are slower and more inconvenient. Plus, there will always be a time when public transport is not feasible, like in an extremely small and isolated community where empty buses would essentially just be driving around. Much to the dismay of stupid city liberals, there is nothing inherently wrong with people living in homes that are more spread out. I personally know that I could never be happy in an apartment complex with hundreds of other people. Some urbanists argue that putting hundreds of people into condos that take up less space is better for the environment overall, since it removes the need for hundreds of separate homes and it creates denser areas where everyone can travel without the need for vehicles. I'd argue that the environmental problem isn't always people's desire for more seclusion, though our individualist culture is a huge part of why suburbia in particular is popular. The problem is rather, in part, grass lawns, which destroy natural habitats for an aesthetic goal. I'll link YouTuber Shell Bizzle's video on the history of grass lawns down below, since it is its own expansive topic. If we could live with our natural surroundings instead of pushing against it, then our spread out homes wouldn't be as much of an issue. Where I live, our property borders are trees. The fields grow with tons of hay, and the forests touch our homes. Instead of massive natural habitats plowed down just to make hundreds of thousands of copy-paste houses sprawled just far enough outside the city to where you need to own a car. Suburban environments are, by nature, designed to punish people for seeking alternate forms of living, such as the radical act of letting the grass grow. But these restrictions have bled into rural living as well. One of my neighbors, for example, moved in after the previous owner had died. The last owner would religiously mow his 5 acres of lawn so that it was all grass. The new neighbors mow enough so that they have a space to walk in without ticks eating them alive, but the rest is overgrown. At first, I felt offended. How could they let it turn into such a overgrown mess? Now I realize that their unwillingness to mow all of their property's natural growth actually makes a shit ton of sense. Moreover, living in an urban area does not inherently mean that you are disconnected with nature. Rather, it's poor city planning and a favoring of roadways and parking lots for cars that lead to industrialized hellholes with no natural space. While moving away from lawn culture can help solve the direct environmental destruction of creating sprawling homes, living in these vast environments means that you are far away from your city or town's main hub, making public transport or other transportation options hard to implement. Suburbia was created as a love letter to cars, or as I like to say, a blowjob to cars. Phil Edwards made a great video about this on his channel, which I will link down below. In it, he details how the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, made rules around suburban planning, desensitivizing and even disallowing dense walkable home spreads with corner stores in order to favor homes that face roads instead of walkways in strip malls miles down the road with convenient parking. Suburbs were plowed down for cars, so fixing transit for them is incredibly hard. The High Speed Rail Alliance wrote, "There is the popular misconception that because the US is so big, there isn't enough demand or a need for trains and public transport, but this could not be further from the truth. The median commuting distance in the US is 20 kilometers, 12 miles, which are mostly made in cars rather than trains or buses. This is a result of the car-dependent urban planning, which prioritizes cars above other models. It makes travel almost impossible without one." Before the 1950s, the US had many walkable neighborhoods, towns, and cities with excellent train and public transport services, from cities as large as Los Angeles and Chicago to as small as Milwaukee. But after World War II, the Interstate Highway Program caused the destruction of many of these walkable and historic urban spaces, replaced with large highways. One Reddit comment describes suburbia perfectly. "It's kind of trying to be the best of both urban and rural, but fails at both. You don't get the privacy, the tranquility, and the untouched nature that comes with living somewhere rural. But you don't get the convenience, energy, or amenities of an urban area. Instead, you get somewhere that's inconvenient and weirdly crowded at the same time." For those who have been raised in our car-dependent society, the very idea of inhibiting their ability to drive and creating easier options to walk, bike, or take public transit is a threat to their independence, their freedom. But we're not free. We're trapped in a society that puts huge cars, corporations, and profit over anything else. Take America's high-speed railway, or lack thereof. With a push for car dominance in the fact that, despite the US being built around train travel, most railways in the US are privately owned, this means that the vast high-speed railway that we've been promised for years is not going to happen unless serious change occurs. Technically speaking, we have a high-speed rail, Amtrak, but its tracks do not compare to the vast network that a country like Switzerland has. And the train is marketed more as a vacation transport than as a railway that transport people from city to city on a daily basis for business or personal purposes. Not only that, but it is incredibly expensive, meaning it's impossible to use for daily use, like, for example, the New York subway system is. A trip from Philadelphia to NYC averages at a little over $100, with the cheapest trip available being $68. If you're someone who lives in Philly and frequents New York, you're way more likely to commute on a car since other options are extremely limited. Most people who travel across multiple cities are much more likely to travel by plane, which is of course still a form of public transport. A vast network of high-speed rails across the country would be nice, and we already have some of that with Amtrak, but what I would prefer is more accessible train options between smaller networks of cities, such as in the Northeast where most major cities are close together. While Amtrak rails are far more frequent in these dense areas in the US, they are still expensive and not as fast as some other countries' rail networks, meaning cars are still the dominant choice for people even on long trips. People don't frequently travel across the country, so I'm not necessarily advocating for a rail network that covers every small town from the middle of Montana to Florida. But people do commute in their cities or to neighboring cities, and this is where public transit infrastructure is so important. People cite the cost of creating a vast network of high-speed rails in the US as a reason for why it won't happen. But we're still investing billions of dollars in new highways that take up land and never fix our traffic problem. China is a big country, yet in the east, where most of their population resides, is most of their 23,500 miles of rails connecting every major city, railways that have all been built since only 2008. CNN reported that, by 2020, 75% of Chinese cities with a population of 500,000 or more had a high-speed rail link. The cost? Trips start at $13. Japan is another country that is frequently cited for its high-speed rail network that has existed since the 60s, linking all of its major cities. Most of Western Europe is connected by a high-speed rail, yet America continues to fall behind. It's not just behind with fast trains. America has outright failed at public transportation. At this point, most Americans cannot even comprehend a world where we have trains that take us from city to city, buses that transport people in small towns, bike lanes, towns and cities that are walkable and favor the pedestrian, not a driver. The very idea that we wouldn't have to depend on cars is such a foregone idea that most people don't advocate for it, despite the fact that if you gave people more options, they would use them. People don't even carpool anymore, for fuck's sake. Getting your license and driving everywhere by yourself is considered becoming an adult and gaining freedom. But it's not. There is no freedom in a country where every single person needs a car to be free. The Netherlands, while having price issues with their public transport, has a vast network of bike lanes. Not a thin strip of pavement on the road where everyone goes 60 miles per hour, lanes completely dedicated to bicycles. Japan and South Korea are lauded for their expansive and accessible public transit systems. Interestingly enough, a 13-year study published in 2019 showed that separate bike lanes make roads safer for everyone: drivers, bikers, and pedestrians. Obviously, it's common sense that a lane separate for cyclists will be safer for cyclists, since they won't be at risk of being rammed by a giant truck. But the study also found that cities with protected and separated bike lanes had 44% fewer deaths than the average city. The study's co-author told Streets blog, "Protected separated bike facilities was one of our biggest factors associated with lower fatalities and lower injuries for all road users. If you're going out of your way to make your city safe for a broader range of cyclists, we're finding that it ends up being a safer city for everyone." The authors of the study said that previously, people assumed that having more cyclists on the road resulted in fewer crashes. But they found that actually having barriers along the road separating cyclists and drivers significantly lowered fatalities. Logically, this makes sense. Consider how differently you drive on an open highway versus when the state is doing construction and they have one of those fucking 3 feet tall concrete barriers up right next to you. I mean, I slow down considerably. The sad thing is that most drivers don't care about crashes if they aren't injuring them or their vehicle. Hitting a person outside the car probably won't do much damage, but hitting a solid barrier will. Again, this is similar to how drivers on narrower roads slow down due to the perceived danger of having less room. In Portland, where the population of bike commuters increased from 1.2 to 7% between 1990 and 2015, fatality rates fell 75% in the same period. Fatal crash rates dropped 60.6% in Seattle, 49.3% for San Francisco, 40.3% in Denver, and 38.2% in Chicago over the same period as cities added more protected and separated lanes as part of their Vision Zero plans. In Helsinki and Oslo, after changing their street design and increasing the fees associated with owning and using a car, it was reported that they had 0 cyclist and pedestrian fatalities in 2019. Helsinki recorded no deaths for the first time since records began in 1960, down from an average 20 to 30 a year in the 1990s. In Oslo, there was also no pedestrian or cyclist deaths in the city, which has a population of 680,000, and no children under 16 died in traffic crashes in the entire country. Oslo's vice mayor for environment and transport told The Guardian that despite opposition to some of the changes, when it actually starts happening and people see that it's working, then no one wants to reintroduce cars into these roads. So I think more and more people are seeing that this is actually good for the city. Decades of lobbyists, failed policy initiatives, and corporate greed have led us to a point where huge, single-person vehicles are consistently favored not only over smaller, more practical cars, but healthier, more environmentally friendly, and accessible public transit. Some pro-car people will argue that comparing the US's poor infrastructure to countries like the Netherlands, Japan, and China, and so on, is unfair because they are wealthy countries. Of course, their wealthiest cities are going to have great urban planning. Did you forget that America is the wealthiest country on the earth? That's due to our exploitation of poor countries, of course, but that's besides the point. The only reason that America hasn't used its incredulous wealth to create better travel options is because of greed. This country does not care about its residents. It never has. If it was, Robert F. Kennedy would want to create bike lanes, not ban red food dye. I don't bring up these other countries to imply that they are perfect in their policies or public transit or whatnot. It's to show that despite the US being a developed nation, we are severely underdeveloped in our policies on single-person vehicles and our public transit infrastructure. Cars or big trucks are not always inherently bad. Most arguments I see from people who are against moving away from a car-dependent society are poorly thought out and only use the worst examples of stupid fuck car liberals who don't know what they're talking about. The bottom line is that we don't deserve to suffer in a society where we're afraid to walk anywhere, or can't. where we're trapped in our single-person cars day in and day out, sitting in traffic because this is the American dream. You don't realize what you've been missing until you have it. This country is too focused on winning a made-up fight against China to realize that China won this one.
I don't claim to have all the answers. I wanted to make this video because I'm sick of Americans valuing their own freedom over anyone else's safety, even over their own personal benefit. I do hate cars. I do hate big trucks, and I do hate America's poor infrastructure. I don't know everything, but what I do know is that there needs to be a cultural shift in order for us to change. Today, I'm taking that first step. Today, I'm going to walk from my house 20 miles round trip into town to get groceries. It won't be easy, but this is just the first step. And I'm willing to take it. Here I go.
Well, that's it for me, and that's it for this video. I really hope you all enjoyed this video. Please comment down below what you thought about this video. If you're from any of the other countries that I discussed, I'd be really interested in hearing your opinion on everything. Just comment down below anything you want to comment down below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you like me, you can subscribe. I post videos about whatever I feel like talking about, so if that sounds like your thing, make sure to subscribe and turn on notification bell so you know when I post a video. I'd like to thank my Patreon members who are part of my Alpha and Delta tiers. Thank you so much to Dallas Andrade, Lisbeth Ruiz, and Emberly McCooley. I sincerely appreciate all of your continued support. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much to all my Patreon members. If you want to become a member, the link will be down below, as always. Anyway, I really hope you all enjoyed this video, but more importantly, I really hope I see you in the next video. You'll be there, right? Right.